education is the most powerful lever that we have to solve the hardest problems for struggling societies. We've done surveys that show that the average public school teacher in this country at a more affluent school spends $600 out of their own pocket every single year on school supplies. We raised more than $150 million for classrooms last year. So we are one of the larger nonprofits in terms of fundraising out there. And so state and local governments figured out pretty quickly that DonorsChoose was a shortcut to get what was sometimes, 10, 15, $20 million in school supplies to teachers really fast.
Welcome to the So Good to Grow Good podcast, the show where we explore how changemakers and innovators are building sustainable systems for a better future. I'm your host, John Kane Gonzalez, an entrepreneur fascinated by how mission-driven leaders turn ideas into real scalable impact. Today's guest is Jessica Thorne, Vice President of Government Partnerships at DonorsChoose, the platform that's channeled $1.8 billion directly to public school teachers and classrooms. She spent 14 years building government funding strategy and state education policy, and right now she's architecting something remarkable, embedding a mission-driven nonprofit directly into permanent government infrastructure. We're talking about how mission-driven organizations move from nice to have to government can't do without, and what that looks like for scaling impact. Let's dive in. So welcome to the show, Jessica. So happy to have you on.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here.
There's a lot in your story that I was able to read and glean off the internet, but I'd love to hear more about it from you directly. So before we kick into the meat and potatoes, let's say, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I'm a mom first and the daughter of an educator second. So I feel like working in education, I didn't start out planning to work in K-12 education, but it has turned out to take over my life in lots of really interesting ways. Starting when I was a kid, and my mom would have me help her out in the classroom, as all teacher moms seem to do, helping to grade papers and help on field trips and things like that. School was a big deal in our house. I loved learning growing up. I was one of those nerdy kids who loved to read, and I did really well in school, even though I grew up in sort of a rural place where that wasn't always the norm for people to do well. I was in the gifted and talented program. I was really soaring. But then by the time I got to high school, I got really, really bored. And I started to burn out. I started to get into trouble, and I really struggled for a few years. And so I mentioned that to say that the experience of struggling in school has stuck with me as much as being successful in school and being the straight A student. So I've really been on both sides of the student experience, but seeing how education can shape your experience in your life, even at a young age. Sometimes it opens doors, and then for a lot of people in this country, it kind of slams them shut. That's made public education a really core part of my purpose in life, I feel like, and that's ultimately what led me to DonorsChoose and the K-12 space in general. And at DonorsChoose, I get to focus on making all of the classrooms across the country a lot more equitable, supporting teachers directly, and it just feels really kind of full circle.
Gotcha. Would you say that, given your experience as a student once upon a time in elementary and primary school, that has fueled your passion for making school better?
That absolutely. And, I came out of my undergraduate studies working in a nonprofit fellowship program. I actually worked in the aerospace industry for a nonprofit that supports astronauts, which was interesting. And from there, started opening schools. That organization wanted to start helping to open STEM schools in underprivileged neighborhoods. So I dove right into working in places like Los Angeles and Chicago, and got to go visit schools that literally had pipes that were leaking through the ceiling, and where students were sharing books. And it was so different from the schools that I grew up in. And so being able to kind of be in that front seat to equity is what led me to working with a high-risk school district. So I was working with a district that was really struggling at the time. We had to close, I think, 14 schools the first year that I worked there. I was 24 years old and helping to lead a community through the process of figuring out which schools to close. And of course, there was a whole lot of equity issues that surfaced there. But, I really think education is the most powerful lever that we have to solve the hardest problems for struggling society. So whether you're talking about climate change, economic instability, social justice, I think the key to solving any of that is having a well-educated populace that can really think critically, work together, and kind of work towards those shared solutions. I think kids truly are the future, as the great Whitney Houston said. And working in
Mm.
that low-income district, I could see firsthand how sometimes two schools that were in the same zip code, I would have a school that was 2 blocks away from another one, and one school would have kind of Shakespeare in the Park for students, and every kid had a laptop. And 2 blocks away, these kids would have nothing, and they'd be coming to school hungry and dirty. And so it made it really impossible for me to ignore the fact that talent and potential are everywhere with these kids, right? But the opportunity isn't. And I think that's what really drives me in this work.
You mentioned equity, and there's already a theme of emerging here. What does equity mean to you?
Equity means that everybody gets what they need to be successful. And I'm not trying to define what success looks like, but just having access to the resources that you need as an individual to be successful. So whether that's an arts program, a music program, sports, paper and pencils, books that reflect the person that you are inside and help you to kind of see a future for yourself. In the education space, to me, equity is about having what you need, both experiences and things.
Uh-huh, exact. I got you. That's a really well put statement there. Were you working with existing schools or were you starting new schools?
It was both. There were, back in the day, there were these big federal grants to help push STEM into schools. So this is when I started working with government as well, which has been a through line in my career. They were trying to get more opportunities to areas that were having just deep inequities. So one of the schools I open is here where I live in Colorado Springs. We went to an all Hispanic neighborhood. It was a school that was 90% Hispanic in a neighborhood that was not 90% Hispanic. Most of the students were learning English as a second language. And we brought an aerospace program to that school and actually put a Mars robot lab in it, which was really cool. So as
Wow.
an elective, kids could go make Lego robots and then try to pretend they were doing like a Mars rover simulation, which is just something that kids in that neighborhood would have never gotten to do. And we brought in astronauts to talk to them about like the
Wow.
space program. Yeah, it was really cool.
We're diving deep already, so we might as well go there. I have to ask this question, like, why do you think there's inequity in the schooling system and education system?
Oh, I think that there have always been the haves and the have-nots. And I think that what I have seen in my career working in schools is that we're tribal people. And you're seeing that a lot in politics right now. And I think people tend to want to cluster together more than is probably healthy for young minds. So I think this is why you see schools that are built out on neighborhoods and districts in most states. You've got all the kids in one neighborhood going to a school. Well, the neighborhood gentrifies and the neighborhood becomes mostly white
Mm.
people. And those people who are more diverse in economic position or in race or in ethnic background or whatever, they kind of start to scatter and they start to go to their own neighborhoods. And so I think it's a little bit of human nature why we see what is literally segregation in school. There's a fact that's been going around for a few years now that schools now are more segregated racially than they were in the 1960s. And that's just by
Hmm.
people kind of going to these different parts of town. Now, you see a little bit less of that in a state where I live, like Colorado, where we have universal school choice. If you can get your kid there and the school will take your kid, they can go to any school they want to. My son took advantage of that. My son is in college now. I think it's something to do with our tribalism. And I think the inequity of resources, I hate to say it, it follows that. The communities that have less resources get less resources. We have a school system that's built on property tax. And if you live in a
Right.
neighborhood
Yep.
where people are paying a ton of property tax, your school just doesn't have as much money. And so far, there's a systemic problem where we haven't fixed that funding structure in any state in this country.
Gotcha. Like the systems thing keeps coming up in a lot of conversation. It's kind of like this inertia. There's this movement that hasn't stopped. It keeps going that direction. It's like the saying, old habits die hard.
Yeah. Yeah. The system is producing what it's built to produce, right?
Yeah.
Like we are getting the results that the system was made to produce right now. And I don't think there are many people in this country that would argue, right or left or rich or poor, that we are getting the results we want for students right now. So we need to redo the system. And I'm not,
Gotcha.
this is not new. For 30 years, since before I got into this field, people have been calling for that.
Right. And so you mentioned this, like a government has been a big through line in your career. Where did you start in this government? Why government?
Started out because the government had a lot of money. And so for a lot of the work I was doing to open innovative schools, we had to tap into government funding. And that at first for me meant federal grants because in the Obama years, there was a lot of money to start innovative schools in low income neighborhoods. And
Hmm.
I was trying to get in and tap into that and did pretty successfully.
Hmm.
And then I started getting into advising other folks on how to do that and how to access federal money or state money that was for grants and things. And then when I was working for a network of project-based learning schools, which is a type of education that I fully believe in, I think that is kind of the way to the future. New Tech Network, shout out to them because they're flipping fantastic. I started going to work with state legislatures because the money was drying up at that point. This was kind of post Obama. There weren't as many federal grants. There weren't as many state grants. We were in kind of a pseudo coming out of the big recession, but still in a pseudo recession, and working with states directly to say, we need schools to look like X in informing policy became something I was really, really passionate about. And so I did lobbying work in Michigan, South Carolina, California, and Texas to begin off lobbying. I'm not a registered lobbyist, but literally going to meet with people in governor's offices and state legislatures and just kind of plead the case of hey, we have an evidence-based system for schools here that we could implement, but we're running into barriers because of your system, whether that is you require them to take too many tests or you require them to have this set of textbooks and teach to it. Just
Right.
making them aware that the system was blocking us from doing things that could be really great.
Right. Right. So, like starting or helping schools, was that always something that you wanted to do, or is this like it just so happened to be that way?
It just happened, man. I mean, I think I knew that I wanted to work in public service. Like I knew from a very young age that I was somebody who didn't want to be in the corporate rat race. I wasn't in it to make a bunch of money. I knew from a pretty young age I was aware that I was going to have something to keep me motivated that was doing good for me.
Mm,
And I struggled for a long time. I flirted with going into environmental science for a while when I was in college. Like I didn't really know what shape that was going to take. And it was really when I was working in the nonprofit field for that space organization that I started to do work in schools. And I thought it was two things. It was first the inequities that were just like smacking me in the face every day. Like I'd heard people talk about it, but actually going into some of these like deeply urban schools and just seeing the absolute lack of resources and the struggles that the teachers were having in those environments and the school leaders, that really made it apparent to me like there was a problem that needed to be solved and that I was in a
hmm.
village where I could maybe work to help them solve it. Not to solve it for them, because that is like deeply important to me that we don't go into these communities and tell them what to do, but that I was somebody who could work with them to translate their needs into speak that the government and the people who could make changes could understand or get on board with.
Hmm.
And then I also, like, every time I've tried to dip out of education for a minute, I come running right back because it is
Right.
my heart. There's also like a real perk of getting to go visit, say, a kindergarten classroom every once in a while.
Yeah.
Like it's good work.
Yeah. There's something about service work, like once you're exposed to it, whether you come to it as your first foray into the workforce or later on, once you see it, you can't not see it anymore.
Right.
And it
Right.
really, really puts a question on yourself like, okay, am I going to continue not helping here or?
Right. I mean, you made me realize like being able to measure. Was thinking about when I have worked briefly in for profit spaces, your success there is measured in dollars and cents.
Hmm.
It's how much
Hmm.
money did we bring in? Did we save? When you're working in the social sector, it's how many lives did we change? Like how much progress
Hmm.
we made towards changing lives, and there's no better high than that.
Yeah. And there's no value on that either. It's what's the word? Priceless.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating having these conversations with the folks, like there's something deeper driving the individual. And sometimes it's just hard to put to words, but I think more and more than anything else, practically speaking, it's just like, wow, I can help. I, I may not be able to solve it, but I can help. So, wow. And then like, maybe to just dive deeper a little bit more, where did you get that value? Was that, again, it naturally happened, but you mentioned your mother was a teacher. Did she teach you some of these things? Was there other people in your life leading up to this point where you're like, now you're in the nonprofit space? Like, this is definitely how I want to work, how I want to carry out my career.
Yeah, that's a good question. Not one I've really reflected on the whole time, actually. I mean, obviously, my mom's a teacher. She's a public servant, so I've watched that. She volunteered a ton when I was a kid. Before she was a teacher, she would volunteer in our classroom and volunteer in a bunch of places. I also grew up with a grandmother and a great grandmother. I was really fortunate to have both of
Wow.
them until I was
Yeah.
about 14, which is unusual. And they were both deeply involved in their church. They were very religious Christian women. And so they really pushed the value of just like kindness and service to others toward me, I
Mm.
think. and
Hmm.
encouraging me to, I remember growing up being told that like there was not much more that mattered to my mother or my grandmothers rather than that I was a kind person and that I was a caring person. And I think I just really had that drilled into me from a young age and took it to heart. And, very early on was encouraged to help people. My mom had me helping in classes. I was involved in sports a lot. So we did a lot of fundraisers to help people. I was in
Right.
music programs where we would go visit nursing homes. And I actually ended up being a nursing home volunteer until I left my hometown when I graduated high school. And I
Right.
think that being able to volunteer at a young age and do service from a young age really just imprinted on my heart how good it feels to go help others and how that kind of takes you out of your head and your own problems a little bit,
Hmm.
makes your life seem pretty good. It helps you appreciate what you have and while also being able to give back.
Yeah. Wow. I think it's having being surrounded with that type of, I guess let's call it culture, it definitely shapes
Yeah.
and forms you in many ways that you don't really realize until maybe later. And it definitely shows in your career that you've taken it to the next level of service, especially in the work you're doing now. But there was also something you mentioned earlier. You were helping move or inform policy and legislation. Is that right?
Yeah.
What made you effective in doing that? And like, how does
Yeah.
someone get involved in doing that?
I've always been a little bit of a political nerd. Like when I was like much, much younger, I would like write essays for the ACLU essay contest. Like I remember being a high school student who was like very like stridently like anti-Iraq war. Like, I've always been a little bit of a policy nerd. I'm that person who always has like C-SPAN or CNN or something on. I've always followed politics and been really
Hmm.
fascinated by it. I did a lot of poli-sci classes in college, even though that wasn't my major. Um, Realizing how much government like plays a role in people's lives, whether they like it or not. We hear a lot from people about shrinking the size of government, but the reality is everything from like having your lights on in your house to the streets you're driving on to the schools you went to is run by government. Like government really
Right.
has the greatest day-to-day impact on people's lives. And being able to influence at that level felt really important to me. The other thing that really got me into government was visiting these classrooms and helping to build these innovative schools and talking to teachers every single day. And then when I started talking to legislatures, mostly just to get funding from them, there was such a deep disconnect between the two of what legislators thought was going on, the people in power, what they think is happening in schools, and what's actually happening day to
Right.
day
Yeah.
or what
Right.
legislators and policymakers think schools need to have and what schools actually need. There's a gulf between those two things. And so I started to realize that I could be the person who was taking those ideas back to government and saying, look, or sometimes I did this often in my career, bringing teachers with me to talk to people in government and let them speak
Right.
firsthand and say, this is actually what we need. An easy one. We don't need more tests. We need more time with students.
Right.
Government
Right.
the layer on accountability and it's taking away from time to teach. And then we're watching the test scores go like this.
Yeah.
And it's obvious why. Teachers can tell you why. We're not
Yeah.
listening. And so I think that working in policy in the way that I do allows me to kind of bring that true voice into a space where decisions can be made and hopefully better decisions.
Right. That's definitely important work. I used to call the used to call the folks in the government the folks in the ivory tower, and
Yeah.
it's definitely that there's a disconnect there in everything, including the way that they communicate. The strategic goals and objectives. I just remember reading these with some educators as well. Did a little work in that space, and they're like, I don't know what that means, but yeah, we're just gonna write something here, but
Right.
in any case, you bring up a lot about this gap, the inequities, the lack of understanding or communication between the higher ups in government and the people on the ground doing the work. And I find that a lot of our work in the GovTech space, let's say, or in government space, is being a translator. So how does Donors Choose fit into this whole thing?
Mhm.
Where does that come into your story?
So glad you asked. So I've been at DonorsChoose for about a year and a half now, but I have known of DonorsChoose for my entire career. My mom has used them to get resources for her classroom. I used
Your
to
mom's
send
still teaching?
my mom still teaches. She is teaching fourth
Wow.
grade this year, and she just had a project I'll tell you about on DonorsChoose. Yeah, good for her, right? So
Congratulations, mom.
Yeah, so we love a mom, we love a teacher. So DonorsChoose has been kind of floating around me for all these years, and I'm so happy to finally be in a role at the organization. But DonorsChoose is an education nonprofit, so staying in that social sector, and it was founded by a school teacher in the Bronx 25 years ago. So what it is it is a online platform for giving to public schools. So teachers anywhere in the country, we have had teachers in 90% of public schools in this country over the past 25 years create at least one project on DonorsChoose. The project means that they go in and they say, here's something I'm trying to get done in my classroom, and here's the stuff I need to do it. So it could be, I'm trying to make sure my kids have good nutrition before they take their standardized tests, and I need 10 boxes of goldfish crackers and a bunch of Nutri-Grain bars. It could be, I want to teach my kids how energy works, and we're going to build potato batteries. And I need I
Mhm.
need stacks of potatoes and batteries and wire and some wood blocks to get that done. And then anybody in the country can go to DonorsChoose.org and they can donate to those projects. You can look up the school down the street from you, the school you went to. You can just search for all of the science projects we've got if you want to, any art project, and you can give $10, $20, $50, $500, as much as you want to make that teacher's dreams come true. And then the teacher reports back later and says, thank you so much. I recently donated to a production of SpongeBob the Musical at a high school somewhere out in the country, and I got pictures from the musical, like what they did and how great it was for the kids. So it's just
That's
a really,
amazing.
really rewarding thing. And the goal at DonorsChoose is that equity piece. Again, it's to make sure that every single classroom and every child in every classroom has access to the tools and experiences they need to have a great education and a great experience in school. And that's what we do.
Wow. Is it just money, or is it also people giving those Nutri-Grain bars or materials, or is it just
They give the money. They give the money and we don't cap like what they give, but it's part of it is that makes us different is it's not a GoFundMe where people can give money and then the money just kind of sits or the money can be done with whatever. Transparency is a really important part of us. We feel like on trust, both that the teachers trust that we're going to do what we say we're going to do, and that our donors trust that their money is going to do what we said it's going to do is really, really important. So DonorsChoose has built this vast infrastructure where people donate the money to the project. We order the supplies. When a teacher creates a project, they have a wish list. They have a shopping cart of, I'm going to need these things, and here's what every single thing costs down to the penny. And then we order those supplies for them and we ship it directly to the school. So there's no chance that any money is going to go missing. We work with teachers if prices change. We obviously have a
right?
fund to cover that. So it's 100% guaranteed that when you give to DonorsChoose, what you chose to purchase is going to get to that school.
So you're the trusted middle person.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's really fascinating. So, in the 1 year that you've been at DonorsChoose, like what has been some of the most like you wouldn't expect it moments that you've had, success stories or anything of that nature? What has surprised you about how DonorsChoose works?
I think one of the first things that surprised me, because like I said, my mom's used the platform when I was working in a school district or over the years as I've worked in schools, when teachers have asked me about ways to get things that were just kind of too small scale for government money. I've sent them to DonorsChoose for years and years and years. So I was really familiar with the platform. And I think one of the things that surprised me is this massive tech infrastructure. Like we have about 200 people on our team at DonorsChoose, and about half of them are engineers who just make all of this run, who are just making sure that the website stays up, that it doesn't crash, that there are no bugs. We have a huge team of people that are making sure that all the teachers have a good experience. They're just going in there and making sure that they are there to answer questions and make sure a teacher has no problems using the site, that all of their stuff gets there in a timely manner and that it's not broken. That's a huge team. We have this massive team that just makes sure that we have relationships with vendors like Amazon and Lakeshore Learning to make sure that we are getting the stuff and getting it the best price and that it's able to get where it needs to go. It's a huge operation. And I think I had taken that for granted, just how much people power goes into that. And tied to that, I tell people this all the time, and they probably think I'm completely full of it, but it is a group of the smartest, most mission-driven people that you will ever meet.
Mm,
Everybody from the
mm,
people people that you meet when you walk into the front door of our offices who are like helping you get to the right meeting room, to that engineer that's sitting somewhere in Los Angeles coding for us all day, like they are very driven by the mission. And when we all come together a couple of times a year, it's just so obvious that everybody cares about teachers.
That's great. That sounds like an amazing place to work, and just amazing to be with people of a like mind. It's like a mini government organization. I mentioned in the intro there, it was once a nice to have, or maybe thought as of a nice to have, to now being something that maybe government can't do without. It begs the question, like, why does DonorsChoose exist, and why doesn't government just do what DonorsChoose does?
It's a great question. The great question. And I always say, I say this to everybody in the nonprofit space, your job is to work yourself out of a job. When you work in nonprofit and you're trying to solve something that isn't working in society, your ultimate goal is to not have to do that job anymore. You want to figure out how to like solve the problem, right? So like ultimately, if government would just like get teachers the stuff they need, great. I think that kind of what we do, our real value add here is that we are building infrastructure here. So we're not running a program, we're building an infrastructure that doesn't exist. So going back to our conversation about systems, right now there are systems for teacher to get stuff through the government. Now, I don't want to downplay local school districts, local school boards, local PTOs are doing amazing work. They're getting teachers the things they need every single day. We are not saying that your local neighborhood school doesn't have all the stuff it needs. But resources are constrained, right? We all know that public school funding in this country isn't what it needs to be. And when an administrator is having to make hard choices about the things they're spending money in their building, sometimes those classroom materials, just those extras that go beyond like paper and pens, just are not within reach. We've done surveys that show that the average public school teacher in this country at a more affluent school spends $600 out of their own pocket every single year on school supplies. And in schools that we call equity focused, that are schools that have more students in poverty or more students from diverse racial backgrounds, and are not doing as well on their public tests, we find that those teachers spend 12 pots because there's such a gap resourcing there. And so we obviously have a long way to go before we are giving teachers all the things that they need to do incredible things for their kids. And teachers want to go above and beyond. They know their kids, they know what makes them tick, they know what's going to get them to learn. And it's hard for them. But the structure is really what I think is so magical about DonorsChoose, is that we've built this infrastructure where a teacher can submit a project. It can get funded in anywhere from, when we're using government fund, it's funded pretty much instantly. I can explain how that works. But even if it's on our site, within 90 days, they get their funding. Within a few days to 2 weeks of getting that funding, that stuff shows up in their classroom and they can use it immediately.
There is money there. The government is funding some of this as well. Like, there is not just private donors and people like you and me just giving money. There is money allocated for DonorsChoose from the public funds. Wow.
Some of them, this is the work that I have an amazing team of directors, and that is the work that they are doing, is to make that happen more often across the country. It started during the COVID-19 pandemic, when schools were really struggling and teachers were trying to figure out how to get things to their kids who were not in their building anymore. So we saw a sudden surge in requests for things that teachers could drop off. Teachers were literally taking little kits of worksheets and crayons and sometimes laptops and materials for science projects to their students' homes during COVID-19, when kids couldn't come to school, to try to keep them learning. We were seeing this huge surge in need on our site. And at the same time, there was suddenly government money for schools in the form of something that was called ESSER, that was supposed to be relief for schools during COVID-19. And it started out supposed to be used to pay teachers, and then it was to be used for construction. And eventually they opened up to where it could be used for things like those school supplies that teachers needed. And so state and local governments figured out pretty quickly that DonorsChoose was a shortcut to get what was sometimes, $10, $15, $20 million in school supplies to teachers really fast. On average, when we have a state that does, say, $10, $15 million on our site, and we say, hey, teachers, the state of Utah is going to give you each $500 in school supplies, that money goes away within 2 weeks. We have so many teachers flood the site with requests that it takes literally no time to spend that money. And within 2 weeks of that, every single teacher has the stuff that they need. That's unheard of. If you go through a state procurement process,
Yeah.
looking at
Yeah.
minimum
That's
6 months to get your stuff, sometimes 18, at which point you have a whole new crop of students. So
exactly. Yeah.
government figured out that like our infrastructure would actually help them to be more efficient. And we've seen really grateful our partners in states like Utah and Hawaii and Nevada have now built that into their state budget. So they are just every single year now, they say, hey, teachers, go on DonorsChoose, create your project. We're going to fund it immediately. And that's a way that you can get this extra stuff. And we're trying to make that happen all over the place. Delaware, I should mention too. Delaware just did a big campaign with us for literacy
Wow.
materials, which is great.
Wow. That is huge. It's something that I was looking at, and it sounds like you guys have solved it. Procurement is just a beast. I mean, that's a huge, huge win and a huge change in how government operates. You're talking about how when you get into this work, the point is to put yourself out of a job. And it sounds to me like you are building an essential system, an infrastructure that the government so desperately needs so that they can respond quickly to the needs of the teachers and the students. So, like, I guess the question there is, this feels like maybe not putting you out of the job, but maybe putting certain other organizations out of a job. Like this would seem to me like should be or could be the new default for how
Yeah.
schools and teachers basically put their budgets forth and get access to the resources that they need. Is that
Right.
something that is happening, or is it, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
It's definitely our hope because the gap still exists, right? We've been around for 25 years. That's 25 years of, 4 million teachers now coming to our site and saying, I need more than what I can get through the traditional processes. I don't have enough stuff in my classroom to help me do my job effectively. And you might even argue the need's only grown in the last 25 years. We just see more and more of it. And especially right now where budgets are uncertain, the government had a shutdown and nobody really knows what's going to happen with education next year. Teachers need us now more than ever. I think the
Right.
other thing that it's important to mention around that default idea, what I would love to see become the default is teachers dictating what goes into classrooms. Right now, it's
Right.
often somebody at the state level or the federal level or the district level saying, you need this curriculum. You need to teach math this way. You need this set of books. You need this set of manipulatives for kids to learn how to count. We're going to provide that for you, and then you're going to teach this way. And it takes some of the magic out of teaching. Like if you spend enough time in classrooms, you get to know these teachers and you see how much they care for their students and how much they get to know their wants and needs and likes. I'll share my mom's last project really quick. So my mom's a fourth grade teacher. She
Uh-huh.
teaches social studies in fourth grade and she has to teach Colorado history. And she realized that in her entire school, which she's in a more affluent district right now, there were no books at the fourth grade level about the Native Americans who used to settle in this area. So there was
Mm-hmm.
nothing that
Mm-hmm.
was accessible for her to give kids to get them into the heads of what it would have been like for somebody from the Ute tribe to live in this area, 150 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. And so she went on DonorsChoose. She asked for 2 different books that she found that were at the fourth grade level that were written about, one's about a Ute boy, one's about a Ute girl. So everybody's going to be able to identify. And she got it funded within a week. And those supplies are
Wow.
on her classroom right now. So she'll be able to teach it right now. It is something she knows her kids are interested in. It's tied to where they live locally. It's something they've been talking about. And it's going to make magic for some kid who knows what it'll do for their imagination.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's interesting as well. It's in some ways also, let's say, correcting history in some respects, but or maybe providing a more full
Yes.
picture of what it happened in Colorado and who was there and that whole story. I wanted to just dive a little bit more into this. For a lot of people who work in the nonprofit space or are trying to get into this, it's like similar line of work. Like, what do you think, or how did DonorsChoose kind of win the trust of government so that government would just give you $20 million to help distribute across many schools? Because that is a tough one to crack. Like what
Yeah.
was what led to that? What made that possible?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that we were able to build from when we started getting into government is that trust is the foundation of the entire model we use at DonorsChoose. So most
Mhm.
often, the donors we have on our site and the teachers they donate to never meet. they never have a real face-to-face interaction. People most often give to schools that are not in their own backyard. They find some project they're excited about. I mean, I've given to schools in Texas and Florida and everywhere else, even though I live in Colorado. And so there were already a whole bunch of tools in our toolbox that we could use to show that we had trust. I think the number one thing that cultivates trust in this work is transparency. So I mentioned teachers come to us and they say what they need. If you go to our website and you look at a teacher project, there is an entire itemized list of what that teacher needs to make her vision come true. And we don't
Right.
hide the pricing. We say this item costs this much and they need 3 of them. And so that's going to be this much money. We tally it up. We're totally transparent about what it costs for us to do our work. There's a 15% suggested donation when you donate to a project to help us have all the team that I described earlier that's helping teachers have a good experience and making sure that things run smooth.
Hmm.
We provide photos. Teachers provide photos back and say, here's
Yeah.
the book you requested. We have kids write thank you cards to some of the donors, and we vet those too, by the way, because there are a lot of
Right.
children who will say, my name's Amy. I live at 123 Elm Street. Will you come read a book to me? We don't let that happen. So we actually have volunteers that read all the thank you cards before they go to their donors. And we
Wow.
do impact updates. So that's a huge piece of it. We have that really rigorous project vetting. We don't take for granted that things can slip through the cracks. And so every single project before it goes on our website gets looked at by a volunteer. Somebody puts eyeballs on it. And if something doesn't make sense, or if it seems like, oh, you could get a better price on this, or this doesn't seem like it really makes sense for what you're trying to do, we have a person reach out to that teacher and work with them to make the project as good as it can be. And so that's why you don't find a lot of duds on our website. Things have been pre-vetted, and that gives government kind of a safety net. And then we've got these fulfillment systems I described where the supplies are routinely getting there within 2 days to 2 weeks. And so there's no lag time wondering, where's my stuff? It's going to get there, and you're going to be able to report back that the kids have used it almost immediately. It's trust for us is not just a marketing message. It's something that we earn through the choices that we make and how we do business.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of work as well because it's volunteers that are doing this work, and I also heard you say it's a 15% suggested donation, which makes me wonder. So some people don't donate to DonorsChoose for your work, which brings up the question like, well, how are you guys keeping the lights on?
I'm proud to say as a leader in this organization, we run a lean organization. I think that's really important in nonprofit work. There's no bloated CEO pay here. There's no fancy, I'm not flying first class when I fly all over the country, believe me.
Uh-huh.
And coach like the rest of you. And so I think that is part of it.
What does that mean then? How often or how much do people normally donate? Like, is it a common thing or a less than common thing?
Most of the time. I mean, so we made it optional several years ago. I think it's a nod to the fact that we're grateful that people want to come to the site and they want to give money to the teachers. And that's what should be happening. And we did not want some 15% fee that was added automatically to keep people from giving money to the teachers. Because at the end of the day, we're here to get stuff to teachers. And so if that's going to be a burden for somebody, we wanted to remove that as a possible burden. That said, most people click the box or choose to make that 15% donation. And I think that again goes back to like the trust, the incredible value that we provide. Donors have a really good experience on our site. I say that as somebody who has been a donor since before I worked at DonorsChoose. It's a lot of fun to go see what teachers are doing all over the country and then give money and get those photos back or get that report back from a teacher. It's really cool to see that and to be a part of it. And so I'm happy to give 15%. 15%
Right.
really isn't a ton of money when you're doing it on top of, the average donation on our site is like $50 each.
Right, and they're donating not to the full project amount, but to what they pick what they want to donate to. Like, I want to donate this money for those Nutri-Grain bars specifically, or is it the entire project?
Great question.
Budget?
So actually, I want to say it's about a year ago, we started letting people pick on certain projects. So we have something that's called Classroom Essentials, and when a teacher builds out one of those projects, it's a pre-selected list of stuff that we see teachers using. So like hand sanitizer, Kleenex, Band-Aids, goldfish crackers, paper,
Right.
pen, pencils, dry erase markers, those sorts of things. If you go to a teacher who's asking for classroom essentials, you can say, my 20 bucks is going to buy you those goldfish crackers. And it gets sent right away. And they don't
Right.
have to wait for the whole project. Otherwise, you donate what you want to donate, and there's a little tracker bar that says how close the teacher is to having their project fulfilled. We see projects that are $200 on our site. We see projects that are several $1,000s on our site.
Hmm.
And so you can donate what you want to kind of make that come true. If the teacher's project isn't funded, the money doesn't disappear, and we don't just like take it back for DonorsChoose. That's not how we're making our money. So that's clear. We reach out to the teacher and we let them know, hey, you raised $350 of $500. And at that point, you have a choice. You can edit your project so that like you're getting $350 worth of what's in your cart. You can repost a project. You can apply these funds as a credit towards another project, or you can repost the same project and try to keep it going another 3 months. So we really do work with the teachers to try to make sure that they're having voice and choice. And I think to go back to your earlier question about default, that is where I want that default to live. I want the default to be entrusting teachers to tell us what they need and do what they're going to say they're going to do, because teachers
Right.
are the future of this country and they are taking care of our children every day, and they bear this massive responsibility. And I think the least we can do is let them kind of guide the way.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I did some work out in New Zealand that's very similar to this model, and it's really it's jogging my memory a lot. And I think you touched on trust again. Like how how easy has it been to build trust into, or how hard has it been? Has it been a simple thing? Has it been? I mean, trust is a difficult, complex question.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the platform was designed in a way that was really smart from the beginning and has evolved with the times to just kind of maintain that trust. I think in that sense, I wouldn't say it's been effortless, but it's been incremental over time as we've learned and said these are the elements that people really value about our platform. In terms of building trust with government, that's hard.
Yeah.
It's government. People don't trust in government because when you're operating in a governmental space, everybody's out to get what they want. And we often walk into rooms where we are literally competing with lobbyists from oil and gas who are spending millions of dollars to try to get their piece of the pie. And we're trying to, sit here with our little nonprofit budget and argue that they should do this out of the goodness of their hearts, essentially, right? We don't have
Yeah.
a greater return other than the biggest return, which is students who are learning and active in their schools and actually having a good educational experience. So yeah, it is hard. I think it's hard, and it's also easier than I thought it would be, because what we do is something almost nobody can argue with. I don't care which way you vote. We find that most legislators do want to support teachers. They do think that public education is important, and they do see that teachers are not always getting what they need. And so if they can help, they often want to help.
Right. And I think in many ways, like the platform itself has found a way to move across party lines, you know.
Yes.
I think maybe part of the resistance that, or the friction that happens is because you have to go through these channels that are just fraught with politics.
Yes.
Whereas this is a simple thing. You can see teacher wants to do this project with these materials. Like, okay, great, take my money. You know, it just removes a lot of that friction, I think.
Right.
That's just my thoughts on it. And when we're talking about trust here, like what do you think, like what are the key ingredients that you've seen with DonorsChoose that has helped build that trust? I heard a lot about transparency and a lot about
Mhm.
reconnecting with the people who have donated. But what are some of the other ingredients in this kind of trust equation that is helping DonorsChoose really deliver?
That's a good question. I think transparency is number one. I think number two is probably speed and accuracy. So
Oh,
you read in the news a lot about some of our competitors in the space, like GoFundMe or even Class Wallet, which are working more with like the private school vouchers and tuition payments. They run into issues with speed and accuracy often. It's really hard to keep things running like a well-oiled machine. And like I said, it takes us a 200-person team plus an army of volunteers. And I think being able to make sure that you do what you said you're going to do, that you do it well and you do it accurately and quickly, shouldn't be underestimated. It's a monumental undertaking by so many of the people that I work with, but it's also
right.
really critical to making sure that we can keep doing what we say we're going to do.
What is in this case, like what does speed and accuracy mean in this context? Like and then what is like, looking at your competitors, what does that mean for them and how are they not hitting those metrics?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a few things. I think it's on the one side, it's speed for teachers to be able to post a project quickly.
Gotcha.
If you're a teacher out there and you have not been on the DonorsChoose website in the past 5 to 10 years, you need to go back because we have streamlined the process that you use to apply. So that teachers tell me it takes them an average of 10 to 15 minutes now to post a project. If they go in knowing what they want to do, they can do it really, really quickly now, and that
Right.
matters. And then there's speed in making sure that we vet it and that we get back and we work with that teacher so that from the time they submit it, it doesn't take months to get your project up on the site. It's up there within a couple of days. We do a quick review, we work with you to tweak it, and we get it on the site. So teachers aren't sitting there wondering if it's going to happen. They can actively monitor. They get a notification with every donation that they get, and they can reach out and
Mm,
immediately say thank you to anybody who donated to them
mm,
through the platform. So it's making sure everything is happening in real time and out in public. When you leave gaps for people to wonder what's happening, that's when their imagination fills it in, and that's where things go south. So I think one of the things that we do particularly well is just making sure everything happens up front right there on the website. And I think our competitors, the for-profit model is usually not that transparent and upfront. They have a little bit more to hide. They don't want to share what their CEO makes or what
yeah,
their
right.
are taking home, just for one example. And so things kind of stay a little bit more hidden. And I think that it really benefits us to keep it all out in the open.
Yeah, it sounds like, especially like that's exactly what came in my mind, the transparency, and because it's a public organization, you kind of get you remove those those gray areas, which
Yeah.
only increases the throughput of whatever work that's being done, because these are things that are not being considered or accounted for because it's
Right.
just not part of the equation anymore. Um, I want to spend a little time just like getting into some of the more operational stuff with DonorsChoose, and
Mhm.
to kind of give a little more light on like how this DonorsChoose actually operates, so that anyone who's listening might draw some inspiration of how they might be able to apply some of these things that you're doing there to maybe their own organizations, or to inspire them to start something similar. I know we don't want to talk competition here, but that's that's not the intent.
No
It's
competition.
yeah,
All good.
just inspiring the movement of people who want to make a change in the world, and hoping that they can learn something from others as well. So um so DonorsChoose has been around for about 25 years now.
Yeah.
Uh, you mentioned 200 people. Like, operationally speaking, like what is the revenue? Like, are you millions, billions, trillions,
Yeah.
quintillions?
We raised more than $150 million for classrooms last year. So we are one
Wow.
of the larger nonprofits in terms of fundraising out there. Like I said, 70% of that is small dollar donors, just your neighbor down the street giving 20, 50, $100 here and there. But we also have really cool philanthropic and corporate partners. So we work with the Allstate Foundation, Panda Express, and Ann Taylor Loft do point of sale fundraising for us every year.
Wow.
Pretty much at this point, I feel like if you name them, we've worked with them in some way, and they've given us money. We've got great partnerships with places like Good Morning America. And Stephen Colbert is on our board, and he loves to kind of sing our praises from his show and give away gift cards.
Oh, wow.
So we've got a massive reach that helps us get there, but we also have a really ambitious goal because that's not cutting it, right? There's more teacher need out there than we're seeing on the platform. And so we are simultaneously working on how to make the platform more accessible to teachers who are reaching the students who are furthest from opportunity. That equity focus again coming into play, and trying to do things like this government work my team is engaged in to get more dollars. Our goal is to bring $250 million a year
Right.
into classrooms
Just
every
from
year.
from public
Not public funds, that would be across the entire board. So
across.
we are simultaneously working to increase donations to the site, working to get people with a lot of wealth to give bigger gifts to the site. Corporate and philanthropic, those teams are trying to raise more money on those ends. And then my team is trying to get big dollars from the government. So we're all
Right.
running together to get to that 250 a year.
Right. What I mean, $250 million a year, like that. Like, what does that go to? Where does that? What is that? What functions the business? What does it improve?
Really, it just means more stuff for teachers. We think that there is enough need out there to justify that. What we see is that no matter how much money we raise, when we've gone from being a $10 million a year organization to $150 million a year, it's not like we finish the year at $150 million and say, well, all the teachers have everything we need.
Right.
We can go home now. The need seems to be infinite. It grows as we grow. And so we
Right.
feel like that is like our next like big challenge we've set for ourselves, is to get to that level and see how many more classrooms we can get into.
Right. So you mentioned as well like 4 million teachers. Like, what would be like how many teachers are there in the U.S. and what would be the goal for? Would it be every teacher in the U.S. or is there? I mean,
That I would love that. So
rhetorical.
first, you're in, I don't actually know the number to how many teachers are in the US, but it is a lot. We are in 90% right now. There's a statistic that 90% of public schools in the United States have had at least one Donors Choose project. We have one kind
Wow.
of goal as an organization where we want to see that number go to 3 projects. We want 90% of the schools to have done at least 3 projects. So we're trying to increase engagement among schools that have already used us. And we also want to figure out what's going on with that 10% that has never used our site. We want to get to 100% of schools have been impacted by Donors Choose. And I can tell you just
Mm.
anecdotally, you walk into a school. I was in a school in South Carolina recently where a teacher had come from Texas. She was a super user of the Donors Choose site. She moved to South Carolina. And not only did she start her own culinary program, getting supplies and materials and mixing bowls and spoons and everything else from Donors Choose, she started teaching the teachers at her new high school how to use Donors Choose. And when I walked around
Mm.
the building with my Donors Choose name tag, they were so thrilled to walk me around. I literally had teachers grabbing me by the hand, thanking me, which it's not me, it's the donors out there. But walking me around and showing me all the things that they had bought, like things like a full skeleton for an anatomy and physiology class, fake, of course. All those cooking materials, they had started a hygiene closet where students could come get deodorant or face wipes or tampons or whatever they needed that they couldn't get at home. This was a rural, impoverished area. And
Wow.
so it's so cool to see, how teachers, take the site and run with it. And we want to see that in every school. We want every school to have every single thing that they need every day.
Yeah, that's a huge mark of success when your customers or your users become your advocates and become
Yeah.
your change agents and your evangelists and getting anyone on the platform. So like $250 million is the goal. What do you see as being the biggest barriers to reaching that? Like what are the challenges that you're experiencing now?
Yeah, well, one of the things that our CEO, Alex Garrier, who's a genius, likes to say is that we're not going to get to 250 million doing the same things we did to get to 150 million. So,
Hmm.
and I think that's true for any organization. That's something that your listeners can take away, is that what made your first million isn't going to make your second million. You have to keep innovating and iterating and responding to the market. And so we don't have a solid answer right now for what we're going to need to change to get there, but we're working really, really hard on it and have good ideas that we're testing at the moment. One of those is government funding. They had such great success during that COVID-19 pandemic getting government funds that I'm now part of a big test where we've got a small team that's trying to see if we can make this happen all the time with similar numbers. Like, why shouldn't states use our platform to get things to teachers more quickly and more effectively? So that is a big bet that we're spending some money on to try to figure out, is that a way to drastically drive revenue? Now, there's a lot of things we're doing to figure it out, but at the core of it, we know that just doing the same thing day after day, we're not going to magically grow to 250 million. You have to make that happen.
Yeah, right, exactly. I guess some more practical stuff is like if you want to increase your revenue, how are you marketing the service and getting those donors and funders in?
Yeah, brand awareness is a huge thing. We have a really rock star marketing team. They do great work. We're really lucky that we have a lot of amazing celebrities that speak about our work. So I mentioned Stephen Colbert, comedian
Uh-huh.
Debbie Bell just won Celebrity Jeopardy on our behalf. He's also on our board. And then he did a tour with his famous friends where they all surprise schools with big checks. So we've got that. Yvette Nicole Brown is on our board, and she's amazing from Community and so many other things. And she's just an absolute golden gem of a human being and loves to speak on our behalf. Good Morning America. We're trying to be in all the places at once. We have a really great videographer who produced a really beautiful PSA for us last year that was playing across the country. Some people might have seen
Mm.
it. And so we're trying, but at the same time, not everybody knows what Donors Choose is. I know this because I'm in the community all the time, going all over the country, and I too often have to explain what it is and how to do it. So
Mm.
expanding that brand reputation so that people hear Donors Choose and they know what we're talking about is a really big part of our goal to get to 250 million.
Hmm. And like And like going back into some of the challenges, like what with the government would you try and like without saying too much, now, is there a certain strategy that you're trying to implement for the government play for funding, or what is blocking that whole thing
Yeah.
from working? Is it
It, it's not even a secret. We're doing what anybody does. We're trying to go to governors and state legislatures and say, this is a really good way to spend money that you're already spending. So a lot of states are already spending money on school supplies, or they have grant programs to spend money on school supplies.
right?
And we know that teachers are getting bottlenecked because of the bureaucratic processes. So we're trying to open it up. Subcontract with us. Let us help you get that. And then on the other side of it, we can provide you with data that they don't have. I mean, what better
Mm,
way than to learn about what teachers want and need than to get a report that what teacher spent your $5 million on? We can tell you
yeah,
every single thing and we can break it down. It was mostly books. It was mostly this. It was mostly that. So it's a huge win for government. And we're approaching it the way anybody approach it. We're just asking for
yeah.
state money. I think the barrier right now is that we have decided to embark on this work in a time of economic and political uncertainty. We don't know,
Hmm.
and states don't know what's going to happen with the federal Department of Education right now. It's being effectively shut down and basically has been effectively shut down. That cuts off a huge flow of money to school districts who rely on some of those funds for healthy school lunches or to help their Title I schools, which are schools that are high poverty, to help English language learners. That money, they don't know where it's going to come from next year. And so it's harder for them to say to me, sure, take that $10 million when they literally might be needing it to feed kids, right? So we understand
Mm,
that the challenge there, and we're trying to work with them to find pockets of money that already exist and just help them spend it more wisely, I think is kind of the game
right.
right now.
It would seem to me a platform like DonorsChoose would be, important to have in these times because it would inform their budget. Like, okay, we can't afford this, so we're going to put that on DonorsChoose, or DonorsChoose is saying teachers want this, so maybe we don't need to allocate for that.
Yeah.
It kind of informs the other, one the other.
You're absolutely right. We had a great case study in the state of Utah where they used some of those COVID dollars to just fund anything a teacher wanted. They had an amount of money and they said, go for it. And then we came back to them after the campaign was over and we said, here's what we saw. And they were shocked to see that we were able to tell them that their teachers had requested books at 2 times the national average for teachers on our site.
Mm,
And the Utah Department of Education was shocked by that. They said, we thought we had provided books. We didn't know this was a need. And they started a separate program outside of DonorsChoose to push more books into classrooms because we were able to give them that data. And I think that's also part of that trust factor, right? Is teachers trust us. We are not out there trying to pull a gotcha on the teachers. We're not telling them what to do or which books to buy. They're able to come to us and just be who they are and show up as their best teaching selves. And that builds trust with teachers that allows us to then communicate real information. It's not what teachers want their state governments to hear. It's what teachers need. It's coming from a really authentic place.
gotcha. Yeah. Well, with the political, economical, economic and financial constraints that are coming up, I always ask this question: if you had all the financial equations solved, all the money in the world, or if you had a magic wand, where would you use that? What would you use it on within your organization to help improve or scale the business?
I love that. I would love to see, I think the greatest need in our organization right now, the nut that I want to crack at work is we do not see as much engagement from teachers in rural areas and highly
Mm,
impoverished areas. And I have a whole theory, having worked in those schools in those areas, of why that is. I think teachers are pulled in a billion different directions, and who has even 10 minutes to go ask for what they need on DonorsChoose? But
mm,
I want to figure out how we make that happen. I think the schools, we do a tremendous job of reaching those schools. Like, don't get me wrong, we actually work with our algorithm to make sure that the schools with the highest need show up first when you look for projects. So we do everything we can to push resources to the schools that need them the most. But we still have room to grow there. And so that is what I would spend the money on, is solving that and making sure that the teachers who had the least resources get to use our site first.
That's interesting. So even with them being on the platform, it's still up to the donors to choose where to put the money at the end of the day. But
But the root cause isn't even that they're not on the platform, because we find that once those teachers are on the platform, they get funded at a really high rate. We have a 70% success rate across the platform. So if you post a project, you're very likely to get that money within the next couple of months, or those supplies within the next couple of months, I should say. The problem is teachers at those schools aren't accessing the platform as much. That's the problem I want to solve, is I want to figure out why and how do I make it easier or more streamlines for those teachers specifically? What do we not know about why they are not adding those projects at the same rate as more affluent schools?
gotcha. I mean, it's a wish, but have you started doing any of that work already to figure it out? Yeah.
Yeah, we're,
Of
we're
course.
talking about it all the time. We had one of my colleagues did a focus groups tour around the country to some really high risk schools last year and talked to teachers directly who were not using the site to try to tease that out. And so we've got that data and we're trying to kind of figure out some next steps forward. It's a tough time for teachers right now. It is a hard time to be a teacher. So I will just say again, for anybody who's listening, if you know a teacher in your life, thank them, love them, hold them dear, tell them they're doing a great job. And if you've got 10 or 20 extra bucks, go to DonorsChoose.org and send some money to a classroom, because it's really tough.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's almost like the story that I hear with Donors Choose is it's a huge success. There's a lot going good for it. And I always ask this question as well, like, for an organization at your size, your scale, with your years of experience, and also with your level of success across the board on many different things, including having huge support from celebrities, which is always a good thing to have in terms of, getting your message out. Like, what are some challenges that you still experience as an organization that maybe people wouldn't really think you would be experiencing?
I think something that my other people who work in this sector, just nonprofit in general, and are trying to fundraise might take heart in, is that the battle to get people to give to your cause never ends. So even though we're really successful and we raised over $150 million just last year, we fought for that money. I mean, we have a
Mm,
whole team of people who are constantly out there hitting the pavement and getting on the phone, and trying to get our stuff to show up on your social media feeds, to make sure that those dollars are still there. And I think in a time like now, like we said, with political and economic uncertainty, with natural disasters increasing and people's communities being hard hit by everything from gun violence to social justice issues, it's hard for us to break through all of that sometimes and say, hey, teachers are still here and they still need your attention, they still need your dollars. And so I think everybody out there right now is probably fighting the same battle we are, where we're seeing decreases in donor attention. We're seeing some people who are falling off of the donor rolls, they're giving money to other things now. You just can't ever give up the fight. You've got to constantly be trying to innovate and iterate. One of the things we did in the last year is we had seen corporate donations falling off, and the feedback we got from the corporations we work with is that they wanted things for their employees to do. Just giving the money and sending them thank you cards wasn't enough. And so we have a whole team that's been doing some really cool stuff to figure out how to up employee engagement and get employees of our corporate donors to be able to actually work with students in classrooms so that they'll keep giving.
right. That's an interesting one. Corporate workshops or programs are definitely, when we talk about ESG, or is it
Mhm.
ESR, the budget line items there, they're definitely looking for other ways to, you know, use that money. I think it's a
Yep.
really, really, really good angle to approach. Um, so, I would love to. There's so much. I'm loving this conversation for many reasons. It brings a lot of reflective thought for me, because there's many similarities in our work. Before we close, I'm just curious. What are some of the most important lessons that you've learned about working with government and working with Donors Choose?
I think one of the most important lessons that I've learned in my entire career is that top down funding and top down impact doesn't work. If you try to come into a community, a school, a whatever, and tell them what they need to do, and if you come in with an agenda, you're going to be far less successful than if you use a model like Donors Choose, where we are never pretending to be the experts. We have, for 25
Right.
years, we've been letting teachers be the experts that they are and saying, you tell us what you need. You tell us how you want to get it. You tell us what's easiest for you. Presents a much bigger return on your investment when you kind of put trust in the communities that are doing the work. And it prevents this like one size fits all, which we see a lot of in education where it's, well, every kid should learn this way or every should have this experience. That doesn't actually work for human beings, right? Like that doesn't work for adults. There's no reason it should work for children. So I think I can't overemphasize the importance of grassroots and just listening and coming in to be a helper and not to be a fixer.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, that's definitely the grassroots movement is definitely it's a strong and powerful approach, which I think is like something that's missed a lot in government. What advice would you give to other mission-driven leaders in trying to work with government or to work within the government infrastructure? What should they know about this work?
I think it's important to stay nimble and to listen and to not make assumptions. I think I can't tell you the number of times I've been surprised by a leader who, from my reading of the news or an assessment of the policies that they'd supported, I thought I had them pegged. And when you go sit down one-to-one, and this is true across any type of work that you do in this sector, you figure out that legislators are people. They're parents, and sometimes they are the children of educators or the spouses of educators. They've been an educator themselves. And no matter, you have to check your assumptions at the door and learn to really listen to people for who they are and connect on that human level and figure out what is driving them and use that to find common ground and move a political agenda forward. Again, I'm lucky that I'm in a space where it's pretty hard to argue that teachers need things to do their job well. So there's not a lot of argument I get, but I still need to find the pathway of, was it books? Were you a real reader? Are you still a reader? Are books what's going to kind of get your attention and get you to get behind our mission? Is it your grandchildren that you have pictures of all over your office? Can we talk about their school experiences and figure out how to get you hooked? It's different for everybody. And so there's no such thing as a one size fits all approach. And I think if you keep an open mind and stay nimble and flexible, you'll be successful in this work.
And in general, for just anyone who's looking to get into social enterprise work or service work, what are some last bits of words of wisdom that you would like to share with these folks?
It's tough. I know we don't make as much money as our friends in the for-profit sector, but we feel really good at the end of the day. So I would say anybody who's considering working in the social impact space, you should go for it. There are so many problems out there to solve, and whatever you care about, I think you have a role to play. And I think, again, if you just approach it as, I'm here to help, I care about this issue, I care about this community, and you show up from a learning position and you dive in and roll up your sleeves, I think you're going to just reap the benefits and you'll be super happy you did.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica. Just want to say thank you for your time. This has been an amazing conversation, and the work that you're doing is definitely something that is worthwhile doing. I think there's something important here about service work that doesn't get the spotlight that it deserves in some respects. And I think it's amazing to hear this story and to see where it's gone to and the level of reach and scale that you have, that DonorsChoose has gotten and is looking to grow into. So with that, Jessica, where can people find you and where can they find DonorsChoose?
Well, you can find me on mostly, I'm an old lady and I don't use a lot of socials, but I am on LinkedIn. You can find me. You can find me, Jessica Thorne, on LinkedIn. And please follow DonorsChoose everywhere. They are very good at socials. We have some young people who are very good at it. So you can find us on Blue Sky. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram at DonorsChoose. And please go to the website, DonorsChoose.org, and find a classroom today. I think you might be surprised with just the depth of things we have to offer there.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. That was Jessica Thorne, Vice President of Government Partnerships at DonorsChoose. If you work in education, nonprofit leadership, or government relations, Jessica's insights about embedding mission into institutional infrastructure are invaluable. You can connect with her on LinkedIn and learn more about her work at DonorsChoose.org. As always, So Good to Grow Good is about scaling solutions that matter, and every story that we share helps plant another seed of change. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep sowing good to grow good.